we go. Great. Hannah Clarke.
Hey. That's a good start. Also, I've got to follow Jay. How am I supposed to do that? I mean, come on. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about detours and diversions, particularly relating to my wonky career. So who am I? It's a big question. It's one I ask myself a lot. Well, I'm a mid-level front-end developer at Immersive Labs, based in Bristol, which is where I'm currently based. We build sort of cybersecurity training software. I'm not supposed to say that because we call it something else, but that is what we do. Prior to that, I was a full-stack engineer at Vago in Cardiff. And before that, well, it's a little bit complicated. I did a lot of different things within higher education. I worked for a university for a long time, mainly as a widening access projects coordinator, which is not the biggest mouthful of job titles I've had. There's some far more complicated ones in there. But I did that for quite a long time. And before that, well, I got a degree in international politics and intelligence studies, and then I went and did an MSc in glaciology. So all of this fits together really well, right? Like that's yeah. So how did I get here? Well, to understand that, we have to go back in time to 2006, where unfortunately I spent most of my time editing pictures of myself to put on my MySpace page, along with a load of emo lyrics. So I also spent a lot of time learning really basic HTML. Did anybody else first come into contact with HTML through MySpace, or was that just, yeah, a few people? So yeah, just, wanting to put things like these incredible falling stars all over my MySpace page, and making auto scroll boxes for my favorite emo lyrics because, that was gonna make it great. I did try and get a screenshot of my MySpace, but it doesn't exist anymore, which is a tragedy. But this was actually on there. I found this on a hard drive. So, great start, right? I was 16. This was all really good fun. But unfortunately, my school did not offer computing, so I couldn't do anything with this. I could do IT, but who really is going to get inspired by access databases? I mean, I certainly wasn't. So this kind of stayed as something I did when I was bored, and that was it. So instead, I went off to university to study international politics and intelligence studies, which I thought would, potentially get me recruited as a spy. It turns out I just really spent most of my time writing essays in bed, and that was basically it. And there's a lot of history in politics as well, and that was my least favorite subject, so I clearly made a wrong turn there somewhere. So I kind of persevered with that. And then decided that actually what I really loved and what I'd always really loved was glaciology, because you got to do things like stand in ice streams with crampons on, looking really cool. So I went and did a master's degree, which was great, and I loved it, and it was really difficult because I hadn't done a science prior to that, but it was a lot of fun. Turns out there are not that many jobs for people with a master's degree in glaciology. It sounds cool when you're telling people that you have a degree in ice, but there's not really a whole lot you can do with that. So I had to rethink, really, as to what I was going to do. So I'd done a few jobs at the university at that point, and really enjoyed working in widening access, encouraging students to think about university if they hadn't thought it was for them. So I got a job doing that for a while, which involved running projects, running residentials, trying to give opportunities to students who hadn't really thought that they could do that. But mostly it involved me making wild fancy dress costumes like this jellyfish, or driving rowdy kids around in a minibus, which happened quite often. But then what? So I'd been doing that for quite a long time. I'd worked in some way or another in that capacity for about 10 years at this point. And I loved it. It was great. It was really rewarding. I got a lot out of it. But it also started to get to the point where it was kind of the same thing every year. September would roll around and I would be prepping the exact same stuff again. And I kind of thought, I need a new challenge. I need to do something different. So at that point, the university was offering a free web development course in evenings, and I just thought, oh, that'll be fun. I haven't done any HTML since my MySpace days. Let's go along to that. So I built my first actual website, which was quite fun and really cool. And I suddenly thought, hang on a second, maybe I could do this for real. Maybe I could actually try and get into this rather than just kind of doing it as a hobby. So I decided to, for one reason or another, move into a caravan and started teaching myself Python. So every day after work, I would get home, I would sit right there, and I would load up Code Academy, or Pluralsight, and I would go through the Python course, and I would teach myself every day after work hours of Python. I mean, it looks kind of like a very old person styly caravan, but it wasn't all that bad. The views were pretty good, so I did quite enjoy myself. And after I'd been doing that for a little while, I applied for every single junior and graduate job I could possibly find. Everything. And I got a lot of rejections, and I'm fairly certain I got rejected from jobs I didn't even apply for, which is always, really reassuring when that happens. So, what's the problem here? How do you apply for a graduate role when you're no longer a graduate? I mean, I was a graduate, but I was a graduate 10 years before, and I wasn't a graduate in computer science. I didn't have anything that was really related to what I was trying to do. So how did I fit? I couldn't really figure that one out. I also discovered that tech tests were absolutely horrendous. I had the capacity to learn. I was teaching myself. I was using Python, I was coming up with solutions, but I couldn't really replicate what someone was looking for in a tech test because I had never been taught how to do that. So I was falling at that hurdle straight away. And when I did actually get interviews, I was downplaying my non-coding skills. I went into interviews thinking I must only talk about the Python that I've been learning, the JavaScript that I've been learning, the fact that I tried to do C for a while and gave up on that. I only really should be talking about that. I shouldn't be talking about all this other stuff I've been doing for the last 10 years. So that really wasn't working very well. I was getting a lot of rejections without even getting interviews. So I kind of thought I need to rethink, I need to figure out what I'm doing wrong here. So I decided what I needed was connections. So I went to events, which was a great start. I went to a lot of networking things for people who were also career switchers, for people who were looking to get into the industry as well. And I spoke to a lot of those people. And I reached out to people from these, which was not really something I was used to. And to me, tech was kind of, at this point, this impenetrable bubble. And I thought everybody in it is going to think I'm a fraud and not want to talk to me. But actually, when I started talking to people, that really wasn't the case at all. And as a result of that, I got a lot of tips, which was really useful. So I learned to not ignore my other skills, which I had been doing, and to explain my non-coding strengths. When I was going into interview, I was previously just glossing over that. But the people I spoke to said, well, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. Maybe you should actually be explaining why all of these things that you've been doing for the last 10 years are relevant. You've got problem-solving skills. You've had to chase around rowdy teenagers, which shows you can work under pressure. These are all really crucial things. So I kind of was able to rethink after that. And ultimately, as a result, I got hired as a software engineer. Hooray! Which was great. And I was hired full stack, which was really good, but it was really challenging because I was sort of learning everything and really not getting to be an expert in anything in particular. But I really loved it, and it was challenging, and that is an accurate picture of me when I first got put on the front-end team and didn't have a clue what I was doing. But ultimately, I was then able to realize that I really loved doing front end and progressed onto my next role, which is where I am now. So why am I telling you all of this? I mean, it is quite a funny story. I mean, the whole living in a caravan bit adds a bit of humour to the whole situation. But what's the point? Well, diversity in tech is still a problem. We all know this. We're all aware of that. We're aware that teams are disproportionately male and disproportionately white. This is not news to anyone. We see the stats, and work is being done, but it's still a problem. And how do you have diversity in thought when you don't have diversity in people? How can you expect to build products that are applicable to everyone when your team is such a small subset of the population? There's a really good TED talk by Rothio Lorenzo, and they, as part of that, looked at 171 companies and found overwhelmingly that more diverse companies are simply more innovative. So we all know that there are benefits to diversity, and there's a lot of work being done to make sure that those statistics are becoming more representative and those numbers are looking good. But what about diversity in background? That's not something that's quite so easily measured. How do you look at where people came from? Did people come straight from university, or did they do something different? It's not quite as straightforward, it's not quite as clear cut. Aside from being the only female engineer on that full stack team, and the only engineer ever to be female up until that point in that entire company history, which is quite a thing when they've been going for at least 5 years. Aside from that, I was really struggling with imposter syndrome because nobody had come from a situation similar to mine. They'd all come straight from a computer science degree, they'd been doing it for a really long time, they were all quite similar in their ways of thinking. And so as a result, I didn't really talk about what I'd done before. I was back to kind of downplaying the non-coding side of my history. All I would really tell people was that I was now enrolled to do a computer science degree part-time, because that gave me legitimacy, right? Like that was kind of making me a real engineer. And then I started speaking about my experience. I got invited to speak on an International Women's Day panel, which I wasn't really sure about because I didn't think it was a good idea at the time. But I actually discovered that having a wonky career path can be an asset. I was able to stand up on and be on that panel because I'd been doing things like that previously as a result of my previous career. None of my colleagues would have done it. They wouldn't have gone anywhere near a room full of people to talk to them. And other people started reaching out to me, people who were in a similar position to where I'd been beforehand as well, saying things like, well, do you think I could do this too? Do you think it's something that would be feasible for me? So what should we do? There's a few different things that we can do here. If you're involved in recruitment, there are a couple of questions that we all kind of need to ask. Like, how do you get a graduate job when you're not really a graduate? If you're looking for graduates specifically, why are you looking for graduates specifically? You're looking for someone who has sort of maybe decided that when they're leaving school or college that, yeah, they'll probably do computing or they'll probably do design. But that's kind of it. They've spent 3 years. They don't necessarily have any career experience. What are the benefits of having a graduate over someone who's had X number of years doing something else beforehand? What are your interview questions really asking? I was on a number of interview panels where there was a list of questions that were essentially just to catch people out on what they didn't know. And I kind of sat down and said, well, what are we hoping to achieve from this? Are we trying to trick people, or are we trying to find the best candidates? Because if you're asking someone something really technical and they don't know, it's not really showing you anything. If someone's coming from a completely different career background and they're showing that they've been learning and teaching themselves, or they've gone and done a boot camp, they're showing that they have the capacity to learn those things. They don't need to know them in an interview. They're already showing you that they can learn it when they get to you. So really, you should be looking for potential. And does the CV really show what you think it does? I'm fairly certain that the reason I got so many rejections before even getting to interview was because people saw I had maybe 3 months of experience teaching myself Python, and that wasn't enough, and so I was just kind of thrown out of that pile. But I had everything else on there beforehand that showed I had problem-solving skills, that I could work in a team, that I could make difficult decisions. Does a CV that just shows you someone's done a boot camp really show you that someone's just done a boot camp, or does it show you that someone's been working full-time and teaching themselves and they're investing in switching career? If you're someone like me who's come from something completely different, who didn't necessarily do a degree beforehand, talk about your own experience. And you don't have to get up on a stage and do that, but blog about it, get involved in networking events, because there are tons of people out there who still think, oh, I don't know if I could do that. There aren't people like me in that space. And if you know people on your teams who've done something similar, encourage them to do the same, encourage them to speak about it. Because representation is really important. People are more likely to think that they can succeed in something if they can see other people succeeding in it who come from somewhere that they've been before. Ultimately, I guess what I'm trying to say is just look deeper. What does it take for someone to do a career change? What does it take for someone to think, I'm going to invest my time, my money, and try and do this really difficult thing? And why would someone do that unless they really wanted it? That's all I've got. Thank you.